Hello there. On today's episode of the Nerd Byword, we will be sharing our greatest hopes for the upcoming Obi Wan Kenobi series. Will this show drive the story forward or simply sink in the nostalgia? The Byword begins now. Welcome to the desert sands of Tatooine, at least it feels that way at the moment. On today's episode of the Nerd Byword podcast, Dave and I will be casting our new hopes into the Force for the upcoming series Obi Wan Kenobi. Now, this episode will be releasing just a few days before the Disney Plus premiere, so we nailed the timing of this. The Kessel Run has nothing on us, but more on that in a second. First, let's head to Coruscant for... Dave, we've got confirmation on an earlier nerd news story.
Yeah, and I'm again unsure how to feel about this. It's not exactly what I anticipated. So it appears, according to Variety, that a new Daredevil series is moving forward at Disney Plus, and Variety had the exclusive scoop that Matt Corman and Chris Ord are attached to write and executive produce this new Daredevil series. So that means, first of all, that the behind-the-scenes folks involved with the Netflix run of Daredevil are out and they are bringing in fresh blood. There isn't clear confirmation in this news story that Charlie Cox is going to be back, but the general assumption seems to be that since both he and Vincent D'Onofrio, since they've both made appearances in recent MCU projects, that they are both currently expected to return. Now, what makes this interesting is when you start digging into the background of the two new writers/showrunners. And here we have Corman and Ord, who have worked on NBC dramas The Enemy Within and The Brave, as well as Containment at the CW. And I will freely admit I have not watched any of those particular shows. However, I did watch probably the thing that they are most famous for, and that is Covert Affairs, a series starring Piper Perabo and Christopher Gorham at USA Network back in their character-driven show age that also included stuff like Psych and Monk. My wife was a very big fan of Covert Affairs, and I ended up watching the whole series. And for what it was, Covert Affairs was extremely enjoyable. However, I find myself struggling a little bit with seeing the Covert Affairs team pulling off a Daredevil series that will rival what has been done in the past 3 seasons at Netflix. There's also some trepidation going around among the fandom already of whether a Disney Plus show will be as gritty as the previous shows, with some suggesting that perhaps the Disney Plus show will take a page out of Mark Waid's run on the character, which was an attempt to kind of lighten the character up a little bit. To some success, I will say. I really enjoyed Mark Waid's run, although there seems to be something about Daredevil that makes him kind of in the class of Spider-Man, where people seem to like him most when he suffers. I'm interested in what they do with this and what kind of, what sort of the overall pitch is for this new Daredevil show, if it's going to be in continuity with the previous show, if it's going to be a reboot, a soft reboot, what is their sort of master pitch for this whole thing? What is going to be their approach? A little, concerned about the Covert Affairs guys trying to do Daredevil, but I remain hopeful since Charlie Cox is attached. I'm a big fan of his portrayal of Matt Murdock. So, here's hoping that this turns out. What do you think, Chris?
First and foremost, you just dropped 2 of my all-time favorite shows in Monk and Psych. So let's just take a moment to bask in how awesome truly USA and underrated it was at that time. But yeah, I'm growing increasingly jaded and fatigued at the doomsday fandom of this is never going to be anything close to as good as the Netflix thing, all this stuff. And I feel along the same lines. You're like, we don't know what this is. It's in the very early stages. I'd be hard pressed to believe that anybody else other than Charlie Cox is going to be in this role. I don't think they would pursue something like this if that wasn't the case. And in Charlie, I trust. I mean, like, that is one of the greatest performances, right up there with RDJ's Iron Man, Chris Evans' Captain America, of whatever we've seen in a superhero media portrayal. I absolutely love him in the role of the character, and whatever, environment they surround him with, I think he's good enough to carry it. So I'm extremely hopeful for this, but like you said, it's in the very early stages. So like, let's take a wait and see approach before we're, jumping out the window.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Just knowing a little bit about the history of the guys that are running the show, it's Covert Affairs. I don't know if you ever watched it, Chris. It was sort of an interesting show in that it was sort of a spy drama, but it was very light and fluffy, and there was a lot of like flirtatious undertones going on during various assignments. And I just it's tonally very, very far removed from a Daredevil. Now, again, I've not seen any of their recent works, and maybe some of that stuff, kind of struck a chord with the execs that they're the right people for this job. But only knowing them from having done Covert Affairs, it seems like a very interesting choice.
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of people are making much ado about the content ratings of things that go up on Disney Plus. But I mean, like, they did just add all those Netflix shows in so much that they added different parental controls to Disney Plus that did not exist before those shows. So it'd be interesting to watch that develop.
Oh, I totally agree, Chris. All right, so you are getting us into the Star Wars universe before our big talk with your news story. What you got, Chris?
Yeah, for sure. So in advance of the release of this Kenobi series on Disney Plus, Vanity Fair had a massive piece on the state of the Star Wars franchise, which included interviews from the stars themselves, previews of what's to come, and looks back on recent goings-on. Here are a few of the quick hits on a massive article that's definitely worth a read. More details were given surrounding Leslie Headland's project, The Acolyte. The series will be set a century before the events of The Phantom Menace. Headland, who has received critical acclaim for her co-creation of Netflix's smash hit Russian Doll, said in the piece, quote, "A lot of those characters from the Skywalker saga haven't even been born yet. We're taking a look at the political and personal and spiritual things that came up in a time period we don't know much about. My question when watching The Phantom Menace was always like, well, how did things get to this point? How did we get to a point where a Sith Lord can infiltrate the Senate and none of the Jedi pick up on it? Like, what went wrong? What are the scenarios that led to this moment?" End quote. Director John Watts, a favorite of the Nerd News segment, is slated to head up a series that is said to be inspired by the Amblin Entertainment coming-of-age films of the 1980s. Andor, the series surrounding Diego Luna's popular Rogue One character, is set to release on Disney Plus later this summer, which is much sooner than a lot of fans anticipated. The third season of The Mandalorian will release either late this year or early 2023. Ahsoka, with Rosario Dawson, will release sometime in 2023. But perhaps the biggest headline grabber was Lucasfilm president Kathleen Kennedy expressing her regrets about recasting the roles of iconic characters like Han Solo, deeming it, quote, near impossible. Now, much has been made about everything surrounding Solo, a Star Wars story, but oversimplifying its underwhelming box office performance to the casting of Alden Ehrenreich, or, this is blasphemy, mind you, Donald Glover, is laughably tone-deaf, in my opinion. There are many reasons why Solo underperformed: wimpy fanboy reaction to The Last Jedi, firing the directors halfway through production, take your pick. We'll talk about this a great deal later in Nerd Commendations, Dave, but being this beholden to the wishes and desires of the worst parts of fandom is simply a bad business practice.
Yeah, so I totally agree with this. I'm going to give you some quick hits about some of the other stuff, but I really do want to dig into the Kathleen Kennedy comments. So The Acolyte, we'll see. I want to see some more before I get excited about this. John Watts, capable director, more interested in the approach of sort of this Amblin Entertainment coming of age stuff, because I was a sucker for that stuff, being a child of the 80s. Ahsoka, anything to do with that show, I'm excited for. I can't wait to see it. So let's go ahead and dig into this Kathleen Kennedy thing. Solo is a good movie. Is it a great movie? Well, certainly not. But considering how much behind-the-scenes turmoil there was in the making of this movie, to the point where, as you mentioned, they replaced directors halfway through production, it is actually quite impressive that it turned out as well as it did. And none of the failures of that of the movie's box office really should be pinned at the recasting. In fact, I'm just going to go ahead and say it. I love Luke Skywalker, but I cannot stand Uncanny Valley Luke. I cannot. I cannot handle it. It's awful. It's so wrong. It doesn't work. It is so Uncanny Valley. No matter how good the CG is, there's just something slightly off about it. We are not to the point where we can generate in a computer something that's perfectly photorealistic, that does not look weird to the human brain. It just does not work. It does not fool. From the disastrous, Tarkin special effect in Rogue One, all the way now to Luke Skywalker in The Mandalorian and in the Book of Boba Fett. Have there been improvements? Well, certainly. But now we're also to the point where we're even like computer generating, like the voice, which leads to an incredibly stilted sort of thing. At some point, you have to ask yourself, as a creator of content, what do you want? Do you have a story to tell with a character, or do you want that character just to visually stand there and appear? If you have a story to tell with a character, you need an actor. You need a live person that delivers a performance. Otherwise, it is not going to be believable. It's just plain and simple. Even video games know this to a certain extent, and we forgive a lot of stuff in video games because it is, all of a cloth. It is all, a video game. You're not taking a video game character and trying to plop him into the real world. Although that seems what they're trying to do with She-Hulk, regrettably. Oh, bless that poor show. The point here is very simply that it's not working, and recasting is a much, much, much better way to go. And anybody who says that Donald Glover's recast was a bad recast, they can go suck it. Like, that's just ridiculous. Perfect Lando Calrissian, wonderfully performed, and Alden Ehrenreich was a passable Solo, and I would have liked to see him grow into the role and have another shot at it, whether that's in a Disney Plus show or whether that's in a sequel. I really don't care. I would have liked to see more of this young Han Solo. That was perfectly fine. I think the bigger problem is that they were trying to push out way too much content way too quickly at the time. I mean, Solo came out like within a year of The Last Jedi or so. Yeah. I mean, it's Star Wars movies used to come out every 3 years. If you try to pop a new movie in theaters every year, you are going to oversaturate the market. And I think that more than anything really kicked Solo's butt. Again, was it the greatest movie? Well, certainly not. But which Star Wars movie has ever been, let's be honest, an Oscar contender? They're all a little hokey and goofy, and that's one of the reasons why we love them. So yeah, we're going to talk a little bit more about this in Nerd Commendations, because I really want to talk about the route that Trek has taken in comparison to Star Wars. I think, as crazy as this is to say, I think Star Wars could learn a lot from Trek in that regard.
Yeah, and I don't want to neglect to mention those original directors that they fired, Phil Lord and Christopher Miller, went on to create an Oscar-winning film, my favorite movie of all time, Into the Spider-Verse. So, yikes.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to this whole notion of like creator control and clear communication between the studio and the directors. It was very, very clear that they were trying to make a movie that was a little more humorous. And apparently, like, I don't know if like Lucasfilm felt disrespected by it being so funny or something, and it needs to be more serious. And I don't know, but I think if any character from the original trilogy lends itself to something that's like a lighthearted romp, I think it's Han Solo. I mean, there's not much you can do with a young Luke story. Kid was stuck on Tatooine this whole time, and Leia was like inducted very early on into like being a politician and stuff. So not exactly rip roaring there either. But if you're looking for a good lighthearted romp, like Space Orphan going nuts is like about as good as you're going to get for a setup. So I don't know, man. I like Solo. And I like the idea of recasting iconic roles if you're willing, to do the work of getting, the right actor and you have a good story. A recast is fine.
And I want to say this too is in a day and age where third acts of a film usually are underwhelming and don't stick the landing, Solo has one of the best third acts. Like, it is really, really good. Probably the strength of the film is that final third.
Oh, I'll agree with that. Yeah, it's a great climax.
All right, that wraps up our nerd news segment for this week. When we come back from our first break, our new hopes for Kenobi. All right, we return for the main segment today. This week's Byword Big Talk. And in the much steeped anticipation for the series Obi Wan Kenobi, which will be releasing in just a few days on Disney Plus, we have each 3 hopes that we want to see in this series. We've waited a very long time for this, and as is customary for the format of our show, we have 3 things that we really want to see in this franchise. So, Dave, what is the first hope that you have for Kenobi?
Well, based on the most recent trailer, I think my first hope has already been dashed. I was really hoping for a very small, highly localized story, something that doesn't put Kenobi back out in the world, so to speak. It seems from the trailer that he's going traveling a lot, and there's multiple locations involved. And if we're really going off of the notion that he's been in hiding this whole time, then he probably shouldn't like emerge halfway through his hiding and be like, hello, here I am. I'm going to go back into hiding now. See you later. So I was hoping for something really small scale. Even like, some kind of like cat and mouse game between him and like an Inquisitor all on Tatooine. The Inquisitor's trying to find him and then, stumbles on Luke. And you have this slow build up between these two characters until there's like this big clash, and then just like punctuate that story with like flashbacks to his relationship with Anakin Skywalker. I think that would have been the show right there. I don't think I would have needed like, and now we're going to Alderaan, and now we're going to go and have a big space battle. Like, if you have a Jedi in hiding and trying to keep a low profile, I think there are still really cool stories you can tell at a very, very small scale that would have satisfied fans that don't need, ginormous explosions every 5 minutes, I guess is what I'm saying. So I was hoping for sort of a small scale story, but increasingly seeing the trailers, it seems like that's not what we're going to be getting, Chris.
Yeah. So in anticipation for this, I've been rewatching A New Hope just to see like what could this possibly be. And it's very difficult kind of going back and trying to pigeonhole shoehorn stories like this, that didn't really exist before. Very famously, the original trilogy, they kind of built the ship as they were, in the air. So, that's why we get, Leia and Luke kissing at the beginning of Empire Strikes Back, and then it's developed, later in Return of the Jedi that they're siblings. So, we can joke about that and meme about that all you want, but like that wasn't the original plan. They were kind of just making it up as they go. And so to go back, 40 years later and kind of tell this story that didn't exist before, it's a really, really tight needle to thread, so it'd be interesting to how they work this in here. And I'm nervous as well that they're going to go to too big and it's going to be a mess. So I honestly don't know what to expect.
Well, the thing is too, like we have certain things that are sort of, if not, definite things that are set in stone, then at the very least strongly hinted at. I don't think they can have a big action set piece where, Kenobi saves Luke Skywalker, for example, unless Luke is like knocked out or something.
Yeah.
Because he is like in A New Hope only familiar with him in the absolute vaguest of terms.
Very rumor based. Yeah, very rumor based. It's like, oh, that old guy.
Yeah, and even like even if there's been like the stuff about like a young Leia being cast, even if him and Leia interact with each other, even that should be fairly rudimentary, because in her message in A New Hope, she's not like, "Hey, remember that one time you saved my butt?" She's more like, "Oh, you served my father well during the Clone Wars." Like it's not familiar. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So I'm afraid that they're going to maybe bend things a little too much because they want to have this big epic story, and I guess they just don't need that. I think there's room for a small scale story in Star Wars. You don't have to go huge and epic. And I would have loved to see a pared down sort of, very, very personal, very small Kenobi story. But that doesn't seem to be what we're getting here.
Yeah.
All right, Chris, what is your first hope for Kenobi?
I think my biggest thing coming into this is kind of the redemption story for Hayden Christensen. And I think that he received far too much flack for the prequel films. And I do not lay the blame on him. So I'm very excited to see him come back and play this role once again, and it makes you a little bit emotional, like hearing him in interviews talk about like he thought he was done, when they put the mask on and he fully became Darth Vader. He thought his time with the character was over, and so I'm very excited to see him return in the role. And so as a result, I hope they lean heavy into that Obi-Wan Anakin relationship. And Revenge of the Sith is far and away the best of those prequel films, and that's because we got the most between the two of them, but it still wasn't near enough. And so, as a big fan of the Clone Wars and even more Rebels series, I really hope that they lean into that relationship, because we didn't get near enough in the live action films previously. So I want that to mean more, and I want that to really weigh heavily on the heart of Obi-Wan. And so that's my biggest hope overall for this entire series, is seeing them interact on screen again.
Yeah, see, this is interesting because having Hayden return to the role is absolutely exciting, and it's at the right time too, because there seems to have been a bit of a reevaluation of the prequels. Now, I'm not in that camp. I'm still firmly in the camp of these are not good movies. That doesn't mean there aren't elements of them that I really appreciated. Obviously, Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan Kenobi was one of those elements. But I think the biggest sin that particular trilogy committed was keeping Obi-Wan and Anakin apart as much as possible. If you look at the trajectory of their relationship in live action, now completely ignoring animation for a second, in Phantom Menace, Obi-Wan is left behind on the ship, so he's not even involved in like meeting Anakin and like building a relationship with him, and has hardly any interaction with him until the very, very end of the movie. And then in Attack of the Clones, they share sort of an action sequence, and then they immediately are separated for the bulk of the movie until the climactic battle. And the most time, as you pointed out, that they really do spend with each other is in Revenge of the Sith, but part of that movie has to serve, the downfall of Anakin Skywalker and the birth of Darth Vader. So even there, a lot of those interactions are, not exactly reflective of what they had been up to that point. That is one of many missed opportunities. And there's an opportunity here, I think, to make up for some of that.
I think so too. Dave, what is your second hope for this film, or excuse me, this series?
Well, see, I will say that I think this ties very, very strongly in with your first point. I think what we really need here is we need flashbacks. I think this is one of those things that has to be really personal, I think, to Obi-Wan Kenobi, and it has to be something that delves into his mindset and his regrets, because we got a sense, particularly in that little talk in Return of the Jedi on Dagobah between Luke and Force Ghost Kenobi, that he has a lot of regrets about what happened between him and Anakin. And that is really what needs to be explored here, is that sense of regret, him questioning himself, what went wrong. And I think that naturally lends itself to some flashbacks so we can get some of the things in live action, like the strong relationship between him and Anakin Skywalker that we didn't get from the movies. We never really got to see their friendship, you know? And then we can have, flashbacks to moments where, Kenobi fell short, where he was not the friend or the teacher that he should have been. And he's questioning himself, is this ultimately my fault? Did I take the chosen one and make him like the worst Sith Lord that we've ever had? Like that should be something he needs to ask himself. So I think the series of flashbacks, A, to get into his mindset, and B, to fix some of those missed opportunities of showing, the relationship between the two, and also Obi-Wan's shortcomings. It's really interesting. I was thinking about the prequels, the other day again. We had kind of talked a little bit about like our last time trying to fix them or something, and it's just really in passing on one of our recent episodes, and it got me thinking about them again. And it's very interesting how Obi-Wan changed between Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. In Phantom Menace, there was something a little bit reckless about Qui-Gon Jinn, and Obi-Wan was sort of the straight-laced dude, and which was sort of a weird juxtaposition, that the student was sort of the real straight-laced, by-the-book guy. And then you get to Attack of the Clones, and clearly something has changed in those, years since Phantom Menace, because, here's Obi-Wan like jumping out of a window to latch onto an assassination droid and flying through Coruscant, like there's something reckless about the guy. And he even mentions this, I think, to Yoda in Empire Strikes Back when they're watching Luke Skywalker leave, and Yoda says something like he's reckless, and Obi-Wan says, "I was too," if you remember.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of those really beautiful little consistent things. But like Kenobi sitting there then on Tatooine in his exile and like thinking, was I too reckless? Did I teach the wrong lessons to Anakin? And then showing some of those things in flashback, I think, would be a really, really good thing here, and would go a long way to continue the redemption arc of the prequels, I guess. I mean, I don't think I'll ever think that they're good movies, but I do think there were good things about them, and with some changes, they could have been great.
Yeah, and I guess like I'm interested to see the balance that they do with this. And again, this is one of the difficulties of threading this needle here. How much do you do flashback stuff, and then how much do you do within the current events of the story? Because, in rewatching A New Hope, like, you are led to believe that Anakin / Vader and Obi-Wan have not seen each other for a good deal of time. So I hope they don't do too many ongoing things like on that current time period that the series is told, because I think that could, really kind of screw up what they originally had.
I'm not sure. I'm not even sure that necessarily their exchange means in A New Hope, that means that they've not seen each other since Revenge of the Sith. I mean, the exchange is something like, when I left you, I was but a learner, but now I'm the master. Like, left you where? Left you when? Like, did he technically leave him at all? Isn't that like Obi-Wan that left him a smoldering mess? So, there are various ways to read into that, I think. And maybe this is an opportunity to flip that, I mean, there seems to be very much a sense that this show is going to be pretty, not dark for a Star Wars movie, but certainly depressing. Like, it's, Obi Wan Kenobi at his lowest, Yeah. And so maybe he gets his butt kicked. Yeah. Maybe they will have a duel and he gets his butt kicked, and then Vader literally leaves Obi-Wan and thinks he's dead, like thinks he killed him. And then, the I left you thing might be like, I left you for dead somewhere, that might be a way to twist that around. Like, I don't think that necessarily precludes them meeting again. Although I think the bulk of the interactions between those two characters should be in flashback. All right, Chris, what is your second hope for Kenobi?
Well, I think my most pleasant surprise coming out of the trailers was the Inquisitorial Squad. So I'm very, very interested to see how this plays out. one of the far and away best parts of the animated series is the introduction of these new menacing antagonists. So I'm particularly interested in Rupert Friend's Grand Inquisitor, and even more so in Moses Ingram's Inquisitor Reva. Like, she really sells it. I think she's far and away the thing that I'm most excited about with this series. And it's a really hard. A lot of intellectual properties struggle with creating worthwhile antagonists, and I'm really intrigued to see, particularly her story, because she really sells it.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. The Inquisitors have popped up before in animation, correct?
Yes.
Now, was that in Clone Wars or was that in Rebels? I watched the first couple of seasons of Rebels.
Rebels.
And I want to say that there was some Inquisitor stuff going on there, but I never knew much about them. They're like dark side Force users, but they're not quite Sith. Is that what I'm gathering here?
I think so, because with the rule of two, there's not a lot of Sith out there. So yeah, they are. Yeah, that would be Rebels. Simply, just going off timeline wise, because it's after Order 66, and they're sent out by the Emperor. They're this tight squad that he has to go execute the remaining Jedi that survived Order 66. So yeah, that would be Rebels.
Yeah, so I might have to revisit some of that ASAP. Just to make sure that I'm up on the characters. Yeah, they look very interesting. Of course, I'm always very hesitant about like Star Wars using loopholes to the rule of two to get more dark side Force users on the mat. Plus, there was always an indication in the original trilogy that it was Vader personally that went around and hunted down and killed all the Jedi. And I think that from a character perspective is much more interesting than coming up with all these extra lightsaber, twirlers, if you will.
Yeah.
But I'm still curious to see what they do with the characters in this show. So I'm here for it.
All right, Dave. Your final hope for this is a great one, and one that you've been on for quite some time.
Yeah, so I'm a big believer that one of the great underused characters, particularly in the prequels, is Owen Lars. I think like that character should have been much more involved, so you could have had a nice arc of like him slowly like coming to despise the Jedi and everything they stand for because what he witnesses or whatnot. I would have even said it would have been cool to have him like as a pilot or something that's like friends with Obi-Wan or something, and then see that friendship sour, and there would have been some really interesting arcs there that could have potentially been explored. But as they did, he was basically a cameo at best. Now, seeing Uncle Owen return for Obi Wan Kenobi in the trailer made me very excited, because what we need here is we need some conflict that Obi-Wan cannot fix with a lightsaber or by throwing Force powers around, and the animosity that comes at him from Owen Lars is exactly what this show needs. They need to have interactions, where Obi-Wan wants to get closer to Luke, and Owen is like, there is no way, look what you did to his dad. There's real potential for drama there that is exactly what these kinds of stories need. I'm always a big believer, is like what I always say about Superman, that if you have a character with superpowers of some sense, which Jedi clearly do, then you need to continuously present them with problems that their powers cannot solve. That is the essence of good drama. That's when you see characters grow. They have to they have to operate at maximum capacity. They have to find a way, because they're even if it's a difficult way, because there is no easy way. And so the conflict between Kenobi and Uncle Owen is really what I want to see play out, and not just like one scene. I want that to be like a mini arc in the show, like this growing dislike between the two men. I want to see that happen. I think that's something the prequels robbed us of, and this is an opportunity to put that back.
Yeah, I totally agree, and like in revisiting A New Hope, it's very present, the animosity that they have for one another. The shade is strong in that back and forth. So there's a really great TikTok video that I shared on our social media page where you get that line from the trailer where he's like you trained his father. and then like somebody does like a Obi Wan Kenobi filter or something, and it's like it's ironic that Uncle Owen can roast but could not save himself from getting roasted, and then it shows the clip from A New Hope where his charred body is laying there in the sand. So, yeah,
No,
yeah,
that's mean. That's mean.
yeah.
I approve.
Yeah, so I think that should be one of the driving forces between this, because that's always a good storytelling device when you have two parental or guardian like figures thinking that they both know what's best for the child, and then just that back and forth between them, and like that tug of war is always a good storytelling device, in my opinion.
There's something else that has potential here, and that is maybe a little bit of a discussion about why exactly they didn't change Luke's name. Like, why is he Luke Skywalker on Tatooine, which is literally where his dad is from? Like,
Exactly.
was Obi-Wan trying to use him as bait to try to lure out, Anakin Skywalker, Darth Vader? Was he trying to get him to show up there so they can have a showdown? Like, what was the thinking behind that, considering Leia did not go by Leia Skywalker? Like,
Yeah.
what actually was the thinking behind that particular choice? I think that would be an interesting discussion to have too. And really, the conflict between those two characters is built into the lore of the prequels. I mean, they even had decided at one point that Anakin was too old to train when he popped up at 8 or 9 years old. Like, it's natural that Obi-Wan would want to try to get close to Luke very early on when he's a little kid to start training him. So, yeah, I think this is fertile ground for really interesting character development and drama.
Luke Lars, that kind of rolls off the tongue. I like it.
Yeah.
But it also is like really interesting. Like this just popped into my head too. Like the fact that he's on Tatooine with him, is he like casting like almost like a protection spell, a la Dumbledore, that keeps Vader? Because like, how in the world does Vader not know on his home planet that his child is there? Like he would have to be able to sense that in the Force, you would think. So that's an interesting thing to think about as well.
Well, you also have to remember the very famous sand quote from Attack of the Clones.
Yes.
And I'm only being partially facetious, because it's actually internally consistent with the original trilogy. If you remember, in A New Hope, when the droids escaped to Tatooine, he sent some stormtroopers down. But when they attack the Hoth at the beginning of Empire Strikes Back, he's there personally.
Right there. Yeah.
Like, he's consistent, man. He don't like sand. Like, he'll do snow and ice, but he is not there for the sand, man.
Especially when you're in an equipment like that life-saving equipment. It's a very tight, snug fit. You don't want to be getting sand in that stuff.
Yeah, you better believe that. Gosh, can you imagine what his breathing sounds like when he gets too much sand in the gears there? All right, Chris, what's your final hope for Kenobi?
I don't need a lot of cameo queens. Please, no overly interconnected stuff. This has been the Mephisto of it all, with the Marvel Disney Plus series as a whole, and even some Star Wars stuff. The Book of Boba Fett was enjoyable overall, but I felt like it leaned on too much interconnectedness, into the point where there were large swaths of that series that we didn't even see Boba Fett. So I hope, going back to your small story, a tight thing, one of the things that I enjoyed a lot about Moon Knight is there were absolutely no interconnected MCU things. Like, there are even reports that surfaced that the Eternals were supposed to show up, and the director of that series really fought to keep it kind of a tight story with no overly used interconnected universe type stuff. So I hope that this is a neat and tight story, and I can't even think of a cameo that would make sense in this time period, because it's not the same as like Mando or Boba Fett or anything like that. So I just hope that it's like we don't go gaga over stuff like that, because it just really wouldn't make sense.
And I can tell you that there's I know there were hopes that Qui-Gon's Force Ghost would show up, or that we might see Qui-Gon in a flashback. Although Liam Neeson seems to have shot down that thing, because he said he's open to returning to Star Wars, but only on the big screen. So interesting. Although that might be misdirection, and he might show up. Other things that could show up. What else could we see? We could potentially see some kind of like hint at Ahsoka or something. Maybe they can like de-age Rosario Dawson or something for one of the
Oh
flashbacks. I don't
God.
know. They will try anything these days in Star Wars.
Yeah.
Although I have to say that there would be something interesting in seeing live action Anakin actually interacting with her, because that's something we've never seen.
Well, Hayden Christensen is supposed to show up in Ahsoka, so I'm excited to see that.
Yes. And then of course I'm sure some of the animated characters from the Clone Wars cartoon. I know there was some talk about maybe one of the clone troopers showing up or something. So I think there is potential for cameos. I'm sad to say. But I agree. I think the more they keep those to a minimum, the better. The only time when a cameo really truly makes sense to me is when it's in service of the story. You know, like for example in Spider-Man No Way Home, having Doctor Strange there makes a lot of sense when you're trying to tell a multiverse story. You know, without him and without that spell, that movie does not exist. So it's in service of the story. You know, so even if they have a cameo or two, as long as it is in service of the story and it furthers the plot, and it's not like, you know, the Book of Boba Fett, where there's like a whole episode that's basically like season 2.5 of The Mandalorian.
Which was a great episode, but it had no Boba Fett.
Yeah, it wasn't the wrong show, right?
Yeah.
So as long as they don't do something like that and they keep their eye on the ball, I don't mind a cameo as long as it's in service of the story.
Yoda might be another one. I just thought of that.
I really could live without that.
Same.
And I'm going to be completely honest, and this is a horrible thing to say maybe of me, but I have not enjoyed Yoda since he went CGI. Like
that's consistent.
Yoda. Yeah, Puppet Yoda I love. I love him in Empire Strikes Back. I like him, you know, his death scene in Return of the Jedi. I can even live with his Jedi Council appearance in Phantom Menace, but man, when he went CGI in Attack of the Clones so he can go full on mad frog with lightsaber hoppy hop. That's when me and Yoda parted ways with each other. I miss Puppet Yoda. Puppet Yoda supremacy.
Speaking of his death scene, it's one of the greatest memes of all time, and you can understand this as a father now. That scene where your kid asks you so many questions that you just go to sleep and don't wake up. You get so tired.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, that is accurate.
All right, that wraps up our Byword Big Talk for this week. Our hopes for Kenobi. What do you want to see in this series and Star Wars going forward? Be sure to hit us up on social media at Nerd Byword on Twitter and Instagram. But when we come back from this, our final break, we're hitting you with 2 more nerd commendations. Stick around. All right, we're back for our fan favorite segment. Now, Dave, I am super geeked to talk about your nerd commendation because I equally love it.
Oh, I'm so glad. Are you caught up through the first 3 episodes?
First 2, not third.
Oh my god, the 3rd episode, man. You're gonna love it. It's all about number 1, and it has some really cool revelations. It's a very great character piece. You're gonna like this one, man. All right, so my nerd commendation this week is for the new Star Trek series, Strange New Worlds, which is brand new, but goes back into the past. It's technically a spin-off from Star Trek Discovery, and it focuses on Captain Christopher Pike and the crew of the Starship Enterprise about, I would say, a decade before the original Star Trek series featuring Captain Kirk. You have, of course, Anson Mount coming back from Discovery as Captain Christopher Pike. You have Ethan Peck playing Mr. Spock, and Rebecca Romijn as number 1. And these are all characters from the original series that, were previously, portrayed in some capacity. Obviously, Spock was there throughout. Both Captain Pike and number 1 are from the original rejected Star Trek pilot that was eventually reworked into a really cool little 2-part episode of the original series, which I highly recommend. And it's just, here we are. You have the captain of the Enterprise, Christopher Pike, who during the course of Star Trek Discovery got a glimpse of his future, where he's going to be in a horrible accident that is going to leave him not just confined to a wheelchair, but basically, completely incapable of communicating other than in light beeps, meaning yes or no. And he fears, this development, and is hesitant to return into space. But of course, there's a mission. His first officer, number one, Una, is missing after first contact, and so he gets back on that horse. He literally, actually, he recruits a very shirtless Mr. Spock who's busy getting engaged. Let's put it that way. And they fly out into space, and the show is about their continuing adventures on board the Enterprise. Now, what I love about this show is that it is a perfect melding so far of something like the original series on Next Generation, which were very much about standalone episodes, but has a undercurrent of serialization kind of in the background, like something like Deep Space Nine. So it's not as highly serialized as like Deep Space Nine was, but it's not quite as standalone as the original series. There's nice character things happening, in the background that sort of carry over from episode to episode. 3 episodes of the show have been released so far. Each one focuses on a different character. The first one is very much a Pike story. The second one is focused on Lieutenant Uhura. No, he or she's just an ensign, or a cadet. Now I'm trying to remember if she was a cadet.
Cadet, just a cadet.
She's a cadet at this point. Also a character from the original series, and then the third episode focuses on number one. And I have to say, this is what I've been missing from Star Trek. There's very, very potent stuff here. The acting is great. The special effects are fun. Star Trek is in full, force with its social commentary, going back even to the original series. It feels the most Star Trek of any Star Trek product in recent years. And that is not a rip against something like, Discovery, for example, which I like a great deal. But this is something that kind of scratches that original series itch. I have mad love for the original series. It felt a little bit more, a little less civilized, I guess is the best way to put it, than what we got with the Next Generation. You had a captain that was, kind of shooting from the hip sometimes. It wasn't always clear, if regulations were the right thing to do here, and it just kind of tosses regulations sometimes just to do what's right. And we get that again here with Christopher Pike and his approach to command. And so this is something that I've been missing a little bit in Star Trek. And so it's very, very nice to see that sort of almost like Wild Westish undercurrent coming back to Star Trek, especially considering it used to be like, it was pitched originally by Roddenberry's like Wagon Train to the Stars, which, is awesome. Also, I have to say all the recastings work incredibly well here, which brings us, to the comparison with Star Wars from earlier in our episode. And Ethan Peck is a very, very good younger Spock. Anson Mount is a fantastic Christopher Pike. And I have to say Rebecca Romijn knocks it out of the park as number one. It's just all the little recastings we've seen so far on the show, where we get younger versions of characters we've seen before. It is just spot on. So I don't know what there's not to like about this show. So I'm a big, big fan. The show has a 10-episode first season, I believe. It premiered on May 5th. It should be running through July 7th. And a second season is already in production, which is great news. Check this out. Chris.
I absolutely adore this show. It's such a great time to be a Star Trek fan. I love Discovery, and I think what you're enjoying about storytelling wise with the kind of hybrid serialized episodic nature was really like introduced in something like Discovery, and where you have like a main conflict that is solved within an episode, but then you kind of have the through lines, like the Red Angel situation in the second season of Discovery. So I absolutely love everything. I mean, like Lower Decks, for like the just stupid fun of like riffing on it. It's something like Robot Chicken Star Wars specials of just like divorcing yourself from the self-seriousness of Star Trek that it is sometimes and just having fun with it. But Strange New Worlds is a completely different entity, and I love it for everything that it is. And the cast is out of this world. Anson Mount, I mean, what more can you say? It's like, I love Star Trek in that it gives us different takes on leadership. You know, you have the literal space cowboy of Jim Kirk. You have the staunch pleated pant stick up his butt Picard. Uh, and then you have someone who's really passionate and emboldened and willing to color outside the lines, like Ben Sisko. And then, you know, I see Anson Mount's Pike as kind of like a hybrid mixture of a lot of those different leadership styles. The overwhelming thing that I take away from these first 2 episodes, at least, is he's such a great listener. And he really cares about his crew. His interactions with my far away favorite thing of this series is Celia Rose Gooding as Uhura. Absolutely fantastic. His interactions with her, particularly in that second episode, of truly listening to her story, and her honesty about she's not sure if Starfleet is her thing, and her reasonings for being there. I'm also biased as a xenolinguist fan, so their interactions are fantastic. But I love Pike's leadership. He's got like a little bit of improvisational stuff like Kirk, but then he's also this really empathic person like Sisko is. So I absolutely love him. I love Ethan Peck as Spock. I think he nails it. It's really, I just love the willingness by Star Trek as an entire property to recast these iconic roles. I mean, you think of Leonard Nimoy and what he meant to not only Star Trek, but to science fiction as a whole, and to have the cojones to recast that role time and again and absolutely nail it like this. I love Zachary Quinto's portrayal as well in a different sense, but Ethan Peck, I think, is really fantastic in this role. I love La'an Noonien Singh. Christina Chong really brings it. I love her brashness, and she's just a badass. And you know how we love our bad women that really just kick butt. I love Erica Ortegas as well by Listen Navia, like really kind of snarky, smart aleck, like pulling pranks on the crew, and then just like showboating her navigational skills. I know you love this one, Dr. Mabenga. Like somebody said, like just his voice is so soothing, bringing like a deep cut like that from the original series. There's so much to love about this show, and I have to go watch the 3rd episode right now.
Do it. I'm serious. Great stuff for number 1. Great stuff for Mbenga in that episode. It's a fantastic episode. I really like episode 3. It's disappointing that there's only 10 episodes in the first season of the show, because I just think it's one of the strongest things that Star Trek has produced in a long time, and I just want more, man.
And it's really fascinating. It's really fascinating too. Sorry to cut you off, but like it's really fascinating to see, like Pike knowing his future, and like, can you really alter that, and playing with that storytelling wise, and how that affects his decision making. That's a really fascinating thing to watch that develop over the course of the series as well.
And you nailed it when it comes to the recasting element of all this. We've had now 3 different Spocks, and both of the recasts were very good. You know, we have had now 3 different Uhuras, and both recasts of the original were really, really good and had something to add to that character. So, you know, Star Wars, you know, cut it out. You know, be bold. Recast some of these roles and try to tell new stories that, you know, with these characters. I would be there for it. I would be totally there for a post Return of the Jedi Luke Skywalker miniseries or something, where he goes and tries to, like, you know, find Jedi artifacts or something like that. I would be totally there for, as long as he's not made out of bits and bytes. That's all I'm looking for.
and I did say this on social media, like if that's truly how they feel at Lucasfilm, then the silver lining for me is, for the love of everything that is holy, tell new stories with new characters. Then if you're that scared of recasting, then give us new stories with new characters. That's the thing I love about Star Trek from its inception. IDIC, infinite diversity, infinite characters. I hope I got that right, but you get what I'm saying. Is like it's outer freaking space. You have so many possibilities, and limiting it to Tatooine and Coruscant and like 3 different planets with one family is so boring. Like, tell new stories then if you're going to be too scared to recast.
That's exactly right. Yeah, I totally agree with that, man. All right, what's your nerd commendation for this week, Chris?
Dude, like I'm reading a lot of DC right now. It's I'm reading a lot of DC right now. I'm making the most of that DC Universe Infinite, but like even more recent stuff that's not quite on there yet. But my nerd commendation this week is Trial of the Amazons. Of course, our dear friend of the show, Stephanie Williams, what she's done with Nubia and the Amazons, the Coronation special, and now another mini series for Nubia, bringing that wonderful, wonderful character that was so underserved for so many decades back to the forefront, where she is like the it girl at DC right now, is fascinating. But that also brought me as a vehicle into the first Wonder Woman crossover in over a decade, like 15 years. So Trial of the Amazons is fantastic. We've got a reading order that we'll post here in the show notes as well. But series is written with a fantastic writing team: Becky Cloonan, Michael Conrad, who work together on the Wonder Woman title, the Diana title, Joelle Jones, who does Wonder Girl, Vida Ayala, and Stephanie Williams, who of course co-wrote Nubia and the Amazons, the first series, and then art by Joelle Jones, I absolutely love Joelle Jones' work. Anything that she does with Yara Flora, Elena Casagrande, Laura Braga, Skylar Patridge, Aletha Martinez, Jordi Belair, Rosie Kempe, Paulina Ganeshaw. There's just so much to love about this series. It basically tells the story of the 3 tribes of the Amazons coming together for like this trial to see who will guard Doom's doorway now, because Nubia has now stepped into this new role as the queen of the Amazons, and now someone that leaves a slot open to guard Doom's doorway. So they each select a champion from each one of the tribes, including the Escacita tribe, which is a recent development in the Wonder Girl series, and Yara Flor. And then it turns into like a murder mystery. I don't want to spoil it, but there is a big time murder that shakes the foundation of all 3 tribes. And then you have, like a murder mystery, like a whodunit in the midst of, this trial to see who will be selected as the guardian of Doom's doorway. Absolutely fantastic story about like sisterhood and relationships and bridging differences. You have three very different tribes in the Escacita, the Bonamignol, and the Amazons. So it's very interesting to see how they kind of come together from very disparate parts, and very a lot of animosity taking place at the early onset of this series, and then they kind of come together at the end in spite of all the events that take place here. But I highly recommend it. Great storytelling. The art, particularly by Joelle Jones, what she does with the Wonder Girl stuff, absolutely spellbinding. And I can't. My biggest takeaway, in addition to Nubia, who I already loved, Yara Flor is the breakaway star at DC Comics, and they need to continue to feature her, because between her and my other new love, Jessica Cruz, it's a Latina mommy world, and I love the both of them. So definitely go read Trial of the Amazons. I'm going to go back and read all of Wonder Girl now, because Yara is a star.
Yeah, I'm here for this, man. I will freely admit I've kind of fallen out of the Wonder Woman world a little bit, but I definitely need to come back. And of course, the reason this is the first Wonder Woman crossover in like 15 years is because I think the last Wonder Woman crossover was Amazon's Attack, which probably stands as one of the worst crossovers in the history of the known universe. So, this can only be better, man. So I'm excited to check it out.
All right, that wraps up another episode of the Nerd Byword podcast. We thank you so much for listening. Be sure to stick around next week for the 2nd annual Nerdy Awards. We thank you for your support. If you like what you hear, be sure to hit that like and subscribe button on your favorite podcasting platform. Give us a 5-star rating and review, whether that is Apple Podcasts, Spotify, the TuneIn Radio app, or nerdbyword.com.
And find us on social media because we want to hear from you. We can be found on Twitter and Instagram at NerdByWord, or individually at ThatNerdDave and at ThatNerdChris.
And as always, stay well and stay nerdy.
The Nerd Byword is written and produced by Chris and Dave, two nerds with a love of all things pop culture. The podcast features music by Al Jimenez with additional drops composed by Joe Biondi. Our show art is by Ashery Design. Find us at nerdbyword.com and wherever podcasts are available.